Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going deep today on the idea of living God's prosperity.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
We'll be taking a close look at a Christian podcast called Living God's Prosperity, Becoming a Blessing to Others.
Okay.
And I think you'll be surprised by what we find.
I'm intrigued already.
It's not just about money, like you might think.
Yeah, when I first heard the title, I thought it might be one of those typical prosperity gospel things.
Exactly, but it
Well,
goes so much deeper.
Yeah.
It connects our spiritual growth
Yeah.
with our purpose and even healing.
It really changes how we might normally think about the word prosperity.
Right. And the podcast starts off by saying that God wants us to prosper.
I mean, that's something we hear a lot in faith circles.
Yeah, but they make it clear that it's not just about having a lot of money.
It's about flourishing in every part of life.
Exactly. It's spiritual, mental, even physical.
They're like holistic prosperity.
Exactly. And to show this, they use the parable of the talents from the Bible.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's in Matthew 25.1528.
Basically, Jesus tells a story about a master who gives his servants different amounts of talents.
Which we can think of as our own gifts and abilities.
Right. Those things we're good at or passionate about.
And the master expects his servants to use those talents.
He doesn't want them to just hide them away or waste them.
Right. He wants them to do something with them to make them grow.
Not for selfish reasons, though.
Right. It's all about using them to positively impact the world around them.
Which is interesting because the podcast points out that the servant who buries his talent is called wicked and lazy.
Yeah, that's pretty strong language.
It is. It shows how much God values us taking action and stepping into what we've been given.
You know, it makes you think about those times when maybe you felt that spark of talent inside, but...
Let fear hold you back.
Or maybe you just didn't think it was that important.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Me too. This parable is a reminder that we're not meant to play small.
We're called to step into our potential to use those gifts to make a real difference.
So what talents are you overlooking?
Good question. What dreams have you maybe been burying?
Oof, that hits close to home.
But the podcast goes even further.
Oh, yeah.
They say we're not just meant to use our talents.
We're meant to be a source of blessing to others.
They use this awesome metaphor of a river to describe a prosperous life.
Ooh, I like that.
Like a river flowing outward, giving life to everything it touches.
I love that. So it's not just about our own success, it's about how we use it to uplift others.
You got it. And it doesn't have to be these huge, grand gestures either.
Sometimes it's just the little things, right?
Absolutely. Sharing our time, our skills, just being kind.
Like when someone takes the time to listen to you when you're going through something rough.
Or even just holding the door open for someone.
Because little things make such a difference.
They really do.
The podcast talks about cultivating those inner qualities that really shine outwards.
Like joy, peace, love, kindness.
They call them the fruits of the Spirit.
And those are just as important as outward success.
It's about who we are at our core.
And that brings us to this really important point they make.
Okay, I'm listening.
Our inner wounds, our emotional baggage, they can actually hold us back.
From being a blessing to others.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
They even quote a Bible verse about it, 3 John 1.2, which says, "Prosper in every way and be in good health as the state of your soul prospers."
Wow, that's powerful.
It highlights how connected our inner well-being is to every other aspect of life.
So you're saying that if we're holding on to hurt or bitterness,
It can block us from experiencing the flow of blessings.
and from being a blessing to others,
It's like trying to water a garden with a hose that has kinks in it.
the water can't flow freely.
Right. And it gets backed up.
So we need to address those inner wounds, those kinks in the hose, so to speak.
Before we can truly embrace this idea of living God's prosperity.
Man, that really makes you think.
But the podcast doesn't just leave us with this heavy feeling.
There's hope.
Yes, and it comes from remembering that God is the ultimate healer.
Just like the master in the parable who both gave the talents. A and D held them accountable.
God gives us blessings and also wants to help us be free from what's holding us back.
So it's not about ignoring those difficult emotions.
And it's about bringing them to God and asking Him to work in us.
I love that. It's not about being perfect.
It's about being open to His healing power.
And remember, the podcast says there's no story God can't rewrite.
That's so powerful.
It reminds me that no matter what our past looks like,
God's grace and love can redeem us and use us for good.
that's like a brand new beginning.
Exactly. Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been talking about what it really means to live God's prosperity
And last time we were talking about using our talents to be a blessing to others.
and how healing those inner wounds is so important.
It's all got me thinking, though, how do we actually put this into practice?
Right. It can feel kind of overwhelming.
It's like, where do we even start?
Well, the podcast doesn't give us a step-by-step guide,
Of course not.
but it gives us some helpful ideas to think about.
Okay,
Well, first, we need to remember that God's given each of us unique talents.
like we talked about with the parable of the talents.
Right. We all have gifts and abilities.
So step one is figuring out what those are.
Exactly. And then thinking about how we can use them to bless others.
So, like, if someone's a great baker, they should open a bakery and give away all the profits.
Well, maybe.
I mean, that's a pretty big commitment.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it doesn't have to be something that big.
So what are some other ways that baker could use their talent?
Well, maybe they could bake for their neighbors when they're going through tough times.
It's a nice thought.
Or maybe they could volunteer to teach baking classes at a community center.
I like that.
It's really about looking at what you're good at and asking, how can I use this to help others?
It doesn't have to be flashy, just genuine.
Right. It goes back to that river metaphor.
Oh, yeah, the idea of being like a river flowing out and bringing life to everything.
It's about consistently sharing our gifts, our time, and resources.
And our love, too, right?
Absolutely. It's about having that generous heart.
It's like living God's prosperity. Challenge is how we see success.
It's not about getting more for ourselves.
But using what we have to make a difference in the lives of others.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about shifting our focus from me to we.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be these big dramatic changes.
It can be little things we do each day.
Right, like those small acts of kindness.
You know, it reminds me of something my grandma used to say, no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted.
Oh, I love that.
And she truly lived that out.
She sounds like a wise woman.
She was. She wasn't rich in a financial sense.
But she was rich in generosity.
Yeah, and the podcast talks about how inner healing plays into this too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we're holding on to resentment or anger,
It makes it so much harder to be a blessing to others.
it's like those kinks in the hose we were talking about.
They block the flow.
So we need to address those inner wounds.
And remember, the podcast said God wants to help us heal.
He's the ultimate healer.
It's not about ignoring our pain.
But bringing it to him and letting him work in us.
There's that verse, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."
It's from Matthew 11:28.
It's such a beautiful promise.
We don't have to carry those burdens alone.
And the podcast also said, there's no story God can't rewrite.
Yo, that's powerful.
No matter what we've been through, God can redeem our story.
And use this for good.
It's like a fresh start, a new beginning.
So to sum it up, living God's prosperity isn't just about money.
It's about so much more.
It's about using our talents to bless others, letting God heal us, and recognizing him as the source of all our blessings.
You said it. It's a whole new way of looking at prosperity.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into living God's prosperity.
This has been such a rich conversation.
It really has, and we've covered so much ground.
From using our talents to bless others.
To the importance of inner healing.
And now we're at what I think is the core of it all.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
God as the ultimate source of prosperity.
You know, when we started this deep dive, I just assumed that was a given.
It seems obvious, right? I mean, it's in the title.
Exactly. But the more we've talked, the more I realize there's so much more to it.
It's one of those things that's easy to just kind of gloss over. But the podcast really digs deep into this idea that true prosperity
Doesn't come from us alone.
Right. It's not about how hard we work or how clever we are.
It's about connecting with God's will.
And tapping into his abundance.
So it's not just about what we do, it's about surrendering to something bigger.
Exactly. It's like, think back to that river analogy.
Oh yeah, the flowing river.
Imagine a river that's completely cut off from its source.
I never thought about it like that.
It might flow for a little while, but eventually it's going to dry up.
That makes sense.
So we're like those rivers and God is the source.
He keeps us flowing. He keeps us replenished.
Exactly. And what's so amazing is that God's abundance is limitless.
There's no lack in him.
No scarcity at all. When we connect with him, we tap into this incredible supply.
Of love and grace and provision.
Everything we need.
So how do we actually make that connection?
Is it just about praying for things?
Yeah, or is there more to it?
It's about having a real relationship with God.
So spending time with him, listening to him,
Seeking his guidance.
learning to trust him even when things are hard.
Yeah, it's less about asking for stuff and more about aligning our hearts with his will.
Like the podcast says, seek first his kingdom and all these things will be added to you.
It's about trusting That he knows what's best for us.
even when we don't understand.
Just like in the parable of the talents.
Oh, right. The master didn't give specific instructions.
He just entrusted his servants with resources and expected them to use them wisely.
So it's like God has given us talents and opportunities.
And he wants us to use them to make a difference, trusting that he'll provide what we need.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
It's a life of faith and surrender and abundance.
It's about making the world a better place.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening.
I know. We started thinking about prosperity as mainly financial.
But it's so much more than that.
It's about our entire well-being.
Spiritual, mental, emotional.
And it flows outward to touch the lives of others.
It's not about striving in our own strength.
But about letting God work through us.
Trusting him as our source and becoming channels of his blessings.
That's beautifully said. This has been an incredible conversation.
I'm so glad we could explore this together.
It's a powerful reminder that true prosperity isn't about what we have, but about the impact we make.
And the way we allow God to work in and through us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of ideas that matter.